If you were here with us last week, you heard me start what will be the conversation from last week, this week, and next week. And what it's about is, it's about probably what I think is the most important question that we got for this summer's Hot Dogma of Faith question. And the bottom line is this question: why do we need God? And if you remember last week, I said, I think that question, in order for me to answer that question, and remember, we're trying to answer these questions through the lens of the Presbyterian Church. But actually, when we talk about why we need God, I think that question becomes really personal. And so for me to answer that question, I looked through Presbyterian doctrine, and, I didn't find anything that really resonated for me today. And that's part of being Presbyterian, is Presbyterians believe, or people out of the Reformed tradition, believe that we need to continue to each generation needs to come up with their own statement of faith. And this why do we need God would be a part of a personal or a church's or a denomination's statement of faith. And while Pastor Bill or Pastor Barb over here, while they might be able to point me to some of the confessions or some of the dogma of our church that would answer that question in ways that are right for them, I couldn't find that way for me to stand here in the pulpit to just answer that question, why do we need God? Unless I went back to first to start with, why do I need a community of faith? And a community of faith is different than some of the other communities that you might be a part of. And when somebody's on the outside looking in, they might have the feeling that a church group is really no different than any other organization that does philanthropy. You gather around together and you have some meals together, and there's usually some social time at philanthropic organizations, and then you do the good that you all decide mutually that you care about and that you're going to do. And so in many ways, we look like just any other do-good organization in the world. But there's something different here. And I started to talk about that last week when I talked about somehow, and I can't pinpoint the day or the week or the month that it happened, but somehow over the last 3 years, we have become more to one another or you have become more to me, I guess would probably be a more accurate way for me to say it with integrity. You have become more important to me than people of any other just social organization I have been a part of. You guys come much closer to holding that place in me that I would describe as family. You're not somebody that I meet at in an organization that's thinking about water for the world, or that's doing a community cleanup. You guys are different. You hold a different place in my heart than that. You guys hold that place that only church family can be at. And that's about as close, for me, that's about as close to my heart as my own family. So you guys, when I say family, you have become my family. And I think that sometime over the course of the last 3 years, I have become your pastor. And I know when I sat in the pews and was a member of a congregation as an adult, that person who was my pastor at the time, Barb, you may know, and Bill, you may know too, Tom Eggebine. Tom continues to hold that place in my heart as pastor. And only certain people can be in that place. And so we have become family. So in a few minutes, when we make those promises to Liam, and really also to Sarah and Joe and to Noah, we're making promises to our family They're family promises. And it has that same kind of implication. So I want you to think about that for a minute, about what that implication may be. I think one of the most important, Henry Nouwen gets at it when he is writing in one of his books, and he says, yes, there is that voice that Henry can hear, the voice that speaks from above and from within, that whispers softly or declares loudly, "You are my beloved. On you my favor rests." Now, Henry goes on to say that in the world in which we live in, it certainly is not easy to hear that voice in our world that's filled with voices that shout, "You are no good, you are ugly, you're worthless, you're despicable, you are nobody," unless you can demonstrate the opposite. When Henry wrote those words, there wasn't social media. And so our kids growing up today live in a world that is exponentially more ugly, more painful, a world that exponentially says even more so, you're no good, you're worthless, you're despicable, you're nobody. In fact, we even call it now that cancel culture. And the world does that, as I said, is at an exponentially more intense level than anything the majority of us here in this room today, just based on our age, have ever encountered. Now, I remember growing up, and it's a memory of shame. I remember growing up, the little boy in my grade at school who was picked on and ostracized by everyone. And perhaps you can remember the person in your school that was that person. Or maybe you were that person. And the sad thing for me is when I think about this individual, it started in kindergarten. And I know why. We don't need to go into why, but I know exactly why it got started. And it got started just because he was a little 5-year-old boy and had accidents the way 5-year-olds do. So I'm sure you can all imagine how this got started. And it stayed with him the rest of the time that I was in school with him. And I was in school with him through the 8th grade. And that accident that happened in kindergarten marked him for his entire early childhood and even into middle school. And so can you imagine if you were that individual to then go as an adult to a church and hear the words that you are beloved, no matter what, you are loved, that what the world has told you is a lie. And you are loved. You are loved with a love beyond what you can even imagine. Can you imagine how healing that would be for an adult to hear that? But what if our kids heard that? What if our kids heard that deeply and intensely and consistently and regularly from our church, from their church? And they knew that all the time they were growing up. In fact, it might become one of those things that if we have a child that experiences that kind of love, and let me pause for a moment, that kind of love doesn't need to be, oh, you're so wonderful every minute of the day, even when you're not. It's a love that loves you honestly, that loves you in all of your good, in all of your strengths, but also loves you in the parts that they don't understand about you. And also loves you when they're disappointed by your behavior or your actions. A love that is there no matter what. That's the kind of love that Jesus shared. And as followers of Jesus, it's the kind of love that we're called to give. And it's the kind of love that when a college student comes back and talks to their pastor and says, you know what, I just don't believe in God any longer. I just don't believe in it. And that's not an unusual place to end up at when you're in college. And then the pastor has the ability to say, well, that's okay. Because number one, I mean, the pastor doesn't even have to say this, but the pastor knows it's okay if you don't believe, because God still loves you anyway. So the pastor can sit there in that conversation rooted in the fact that it's okay that this individual is at that point, because this relationship isn't about that relationship. It's not about what we do. It's about what God does. And so it's okay. But then the pastor also knows that, well, you know, it's okay for this person to think that right now. But the church family, the mothers, the fathers, the aunts, the aunties and the uncles of the church, your church siblings, aren't going to let that go very long. Because they're going to continue to love you no matter where you are. And at some point, that love will get through and change your life. It may take a little while. It may take a long while. But that love that we give, that radical love of Jesus, that only the church has the ability and the capacity to share, that's the love that gives us hope for the world. It's the love that transforms the world, that helps to make things right. And so when we get to our baptism time today, I invite you to enter into what's happening, enter into that experience, and to continue to play with this idea of why do you need God? And what are the gifts of God that come to you through this community of faith? Amen.